All right, let's go ahead and get started. I've now started recording the meeting. We should be all ready to go. Thank you for joining us. My name is Robert Selzler. I guess I'll just start with my introductions. My name is Robert Selzler. I'm a full-time teacher here with Idaho Digital Learning. I am also the mentor teacher for the electives department. So I'll be presenting the first half of the content here this evening, and I'm joined with my colleague and co-presenter, Lisa. Lisa, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Lisa Nebeker. I teach for IDLA. I'm one of the lead math teachers, and I'm excited to talk to you today.
Great, thanks, Lisa. We're also joined by various IDLA stakeholders who will probably be active in chat. So if you have any questions as we get rolling along, feel free to paste those or type those in chat, and the fine folks from IDLA will probably be able to answer those questions. I think there's going to be a period in the middle of the presentation where we can kind of have a little bit of a breather and address any burning issues. But let's just go ahead and get started. So the topic this evening is teaching with Google Meet, which is certainly a timely topic. We'll be looking at a few different things through that lens of teaching with Google Meet. We'll kind of talk about what Google Meet is. It's the software we're using right now. We'll be talking about how we use that to teach remotely, and then we'll be looking at some best practices for remote instruction, as well as identifying some resources to assist us in our remote instruction, and introduce specifically some IDLA created content, and kind of overview quickly how to get access to those. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So first we need to meet Google Meet. And Google Meet is a synchronous meeting software tool, which really, for our purposes, means that it's for teaching at the same time as your students are learning remotely. So just like we're all meeting right now, we have the benefit of recording, but primarily the purpose of this tool is that all of you are listening to me talk and seeing slides that I'm advancing in real time, and we can interact and communicate back and forth. So for our purposes, it's a remote, Google Meet is a remote teaching tool, which allows us to do a number of things that are really helpful for remote instruction. We can screen share, like I'm doing right now. I'm just sharing a second screen with a PowerPoint slide. If let me kind of do something a little bit scary and hop out of that PowerPoint slide, you might be able to see that I just kind of showed you behind the scenes on that PowerPoint. So it allows us to present our screen and allow participants, in this case, our students, to see our screen and content we want to share. We can share audio like I'm doing with my voice right now. And if I were even braver, I would share my video. But I'm not going to do that. I've chosen not to. So for bandwidth consideration, you might want to be careful about sharing video. We'll talk about that as a best practice later on, but you can do any number of those things. Share your screen, share your audio, and share your video. It's also, Google Meet is a great app or a great piece of software because we can use different devices to join meetings. We're not tied to a desktop computer. We can use a full form computer like a laptop or a desktop. We can use a smartphone or a tablet to join as well. So it allows us quite a bit of flexibility there, as our students might need to be joining from any number of places and any number of circumstances. It's sort of device agnostic, which I find to be really helpful. So to just kind of preview how we use Google Meet a little bit, we're going to kind of go through some of the controls. So participants join Google Meet by using a join link, and they can join with a phone number that is in each link meeting. So if you click on in this slide the little meeting details, you can see both the join info, the link, and the dial-in number, and you should be able to do that in this session we're in right now if you want to kind of see that information in real time. So if you click that, it pops up and gives you all sorts of helpful information. You can copy that join link, send it out via email, calendar invites, those sorts of things. Any way that's most, whatever way is most meaningful, putting it in Google Classroom, something like that. So your students can actually get to the proper place. One sort of place where controls and best practices overlap is encouraging students to mute themselves when entering. As our team has learned this week, that when you have large sections of synchronous meetings going on and people forget to mute themselves, it can get fairly chaotic when you hear dogs barking in the background, so on and so forth. So it's just a good best practice to remember to both mute yourself and remind your students to mute themselves just by default, and then they can unmute to talk. You use the little, so talking about the little icons going from leftmost to right, the little red and white icons. Uh, the microphone icon either toggles your microphone on or off. So when you're speaking, you want to have that toggled on. You want it to be a white icon. And when you are not speaking, you want to be muted. So you want that toggled to the red. The little icon in the middle, you click that to leave the meeting. So don't do that right now. That wouldn't be helpful. But that's how you actually exit the meeting. Yeah, you can also close your browser window. You probably shouldn't do that right now either. Also not helpful. And then to toggle your video on or off if you're having a bad hair day and aren't interested in your video showing up, or your students might have some bandwidth concern and you want to be uh, cognizant of that, then you can just toggle the video off as well. So there's also some captioning options, some a really nice feature that I don't know if we quite touch on in this presentation that I just learned about is transcripting through this session. You should receive a transcript as well. I thought that was kind of a neat little feature. And then the present now button is how you actually share your screen and content with your students. So those are kind of the basic controls. There's not a ton of features in Meet, but the features that are there are helpful, critical, and in my opinion, easy to use. Overall, I would say, as is mentioned on the slide, on the presentation slides, uh, Chrome is sort of the best browser for using Meet, especially when using the presentation software. So be aware of that as well. Maybe encourage your students to use Google Chrome. So we talked about the idea of synchronous. The main sort of workhorse of Google Meet is synchronous activity. So at the same time, we're meeting with each other. You're hearing my voice as I'm talking, even though I'm multiple hundreds of miles away from probably most of you. But you can also record a meeting, just as I mentioned earlier. And that's helpful in case you have students who, for whatever reason, can't be there for your wonderful instruction. You want to be able to share that. So in order to do that, you use the little 3-dot. I don't know if that's technically called a hamburger icon. I think back in the day it used to be called a hamburger icon. The little 3 dots, you click it and it pops up a bunch of options, and you have a couple different options here. Probably the most important one is the record meeting option. And you can see just from this screenshot, there's 2 different, either you're recording with, you can click record meeting to start the recording. It gives you a really scary, legalese blurb saying don't record people without their consent. That's not okay. I just kind of did it. So hopefully you guys are all comfortable with that. And then to stop the recording, you can click stop recording. It's fairly intuitive, but it's always helpful to see to sort of dispel any reluctance there. So you just click record meeting to record your session. You do have to wait a short time for the recording to begin, but after maybe 10 or 15 seconds, the meeting will chime and let you know that it is in fact recording. And then you can see in the upper left-hand corner that it shows that the meeting is actually being recorded with a little red record icon. So to stop recording, you just do the above process in reverse. and wait for your recording link to come to your email. Just as a note, Aaron McCracken, who was so kind as to put most of these slides together for us, mentioned that email goes to whomever set up your Google Meet. So whatever email originated this Google Meet, in this case probably Aaron's email, is where this session, for example, will be going, not to me, even though I'm presenting. So that's just something to keep in mind, so you don't inadvertently lose a recording, or you're not sure where it went. Just be aware of who's scheduling those meetings. And you should get those emails, which send you to a recording file that's actually hosted in Google Drive, which is, I think, helpful as well. All right, so some best practices. And this isn't necessarily just a Google Meet topic or concept, but just when we're doing synchronous sessions for remote instruction generally, it's important to do a dry run. And what that means is get together with some of your coworkers, peers, whomever, whoever you can beg, borrow, or steal to help you out, and test the tool before you're live with students. Uh, it's, as we all know, it's helpful to try something, because if we just try it for the first time in our classroom, we're all familiar with Murphy's Law. If it can go wrong, it definitely will go wrong. So give yourself a little bit of breathing room. It always helps to plan a dry run. You also want to find out who does and does not have access, if there's any access issues for your students or other stakeholders who might be joining your remote instruction, and figure out an alternative plan so that they can benefit from that instruction as well. And that might be as simple as offering a recording. Google Meet also allows people to dial in by phone. So if they have internet connectivity issues but still have access to a phone, they can use the phone option that you find again in the lower left hand corner of the meeting under meeting details to dial into the meeting. You'll also, you'll want to be aware of students if they can't see a slide deck that you're talking about. That can be fairly frustrating, but it's better than them missing out on your instruction completely. So kind of have a backup plan or alternate plan for students or other stakeholders who can't access your synchronous instruction normally, your remote instruction normally. And of course, the call-in feature is helpful. Also remind them that they can, if they don't have access to a computer at home, they can use a smart device like a tablet or a smartphone. Chat isn't available when they call in, unfortunately, and kind of for obvious reasons, but they should be able to chat on their smartphones and can probably do so far better than we can. Headphones are a great assistive device to using your Google Meet instance. It just sort of, with a headset with a microphone is definitely a nice to have. It's not a need to have, but it really does cut down on a lot of picking up ambient sounds and causing issues that way. We've also probably all encountered some form of feedback when using online meeting stuff, and headphones cut way down on that sort of weird feedback coming in. That's sort of in addition to muting yourself and your students when you or they are not talking, but still helpful. Using cameras creates more lag if there are any connectivity issues, if people are having trouble with laggy sound especially, but even laggy video, turning that off really helps. Just as kind of a window into how that works, audio uses very little bandwidth, and video uses quite a bit of bandwidth relatively. So the lowest hanging fruit, if you're having any sort of laggy connectivity issues, is to just eliminate the bandwidth hog, which is video. Like we already mentioned, it's important to require students to be muted so that we don't get feedback issues, but also so that it's, when everybody's talking at once, which is painfully easy to do with, software that might have just a second of video lag, so we can't see each other and have all of those visual cues like we do in person. It's just important to practice good etiquette and have ourselves and our students muted whenever we or they are not talking. Which kind of leads us into the next best practice, and that's establishing classroom norms for online etiquette. So just be aware that your students, this might be a new format for them. It might be a new format for you, and just kind of be comfortable letting them know in this format, it's best if we just keep muted. In this format, it's best if we just do whatever you think would be best for your classroom and your instruction to make sure that everyone gets the appropriate amount of time and that there's no feedback, lag, anything like that. Probably the biggest piece of advice I think that you can take away from these best practices to give yourself some extra time. Murphy's law with technology is always in force that if things can go wrong, they tend to go wrong. So just give yourself a little bit of extra time. Encourage your students to test any links early to join the set. Join your class. Maybe 5 minutes early just to test their microphone, test their video if that's something that is going to need to be used. It's always helpful just to have that little extra buffer of time, especially when we're not familiar with whatever we're doing that day. And finally, have alternate resources prepared. So if your students absolutely cannot make your instruction, your remote teaching, it's good to record your session. But similarly, you can use other tools to meet similar goals, like Loom, which is a asynchronous recording software. You can use email, activities that we're going to suggest in this presentation, etc. And that actually leads me into, as a nice segue, the handoff to Lisa, who is going to be taking over and walking us through some great resources, some ideas for activities, and also some tools that IDLA has provided. So I'm going to quit sharing my screen so that Lisa can share hers, and I'll hop in chat and help moderate. So Lisa, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Robert. I'm going to go ahead and first, before I start sharing my screen, there were a few questions that came through the chat. And so if you entered after it was asked, you might not have access to it. And also if you're watching the recording. So the first question was, can I keep the same Google Hangout going over a period of time, but only during certain hours? Google Hangout links are active once you create them. You can reuse them. I have reused Google links before. It is a little easier to stay organized, however, if you just make a calendar item and keep that link. So as Jeff Simmons suggested, if you want to schedule different times for different classes or different groups, it would be a good idea to set up a link for each of those and use it. It just is easier to stay organized that way. The second question was, will a dock camera be sufficient for remote teaching? By dock camera, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I assumed you meant, wow, it was a long time ago, but like an Elmo or a camera that you have a piece of paper and you're writing and the camera displays what you're writing. That works. It absolutely works. If it's connected to your computer that you're presenting from, when you go to present, you just share that as your screen that you're sharing, and they'll be able to see what you're writing. As you get going, you might want to use a few more other tools or other things and we'll talk about some ideas for what you can use to help with that. There was another question that said, is there a way to see the screen of a person you're teaching to help them navigate? And yes, anyone who enters your Google Meet room can share their screen. Only one person can share at a time. So if you're sharing your screen, that option is not there for them. So you don't have to worry about the kids taking over the screen unless you stop presenting, and then they are able to present, and you can see whatever they have on their screen and can help them navigate. If it's a specific question they're working on instead of just a navigation issue, I'll sometimes just have them take a picture and email it to me if it's not during the class session. So that's an option as well. So those are just a few of the questions that came through before I started presenting. I wanted to cover those. So,
Lisa, this is
yes.
Erin. I'm going to interrupt you. We had a question submitted to the form
Okay.
that asked if Google Meet will support more than 40 students at a time, and what is the limit? So Google Meet has opened their Google Suite for all educators, and it will support 40 at a time. Just remember to have them mute themselves as they join. And I believe the limit is 250 for a session. So 40 it can support, so you are good to go. Thanks, Lisa.
All right, thanks, Erin. So as we move forward, we wanted to share some ideas. I know it's new, it's probably a new thing, it's probably a little bit scary. But one thing I wanted to say is, as someone who's been an online teacher for a while, I'm a little bit jealous of your starting point in that you already have relationships with your students and you already have relationships with those families. And so you're in a really good place as far as making adjustments. You're already well acquainted with them, and things are going well there. And you're all teachers, and you still get to use that talent, even if you're working remotely. So there are a lot of strategies you can use when you're teaching remotely. There's a big list on the screen you can see right now. Anything that you're already doing in your classroom can be adjusted a lot of times to an online setting. You can use direct instruction, obviously. If you're doing direct instruction where you don't have the face-to-face connection with the kids, where you can't see them all the time and they can't see you all the time, you can have your webcams on, but if everyone's webcam is on, a lot of time that causes a lot of lag. And so it's a lot of times a good idea not to have webcams on unless you're doing something where you need to see them. So if you're using a Google Meet to do direct instruction, it's a good idea to pause every now and again and have a little bit of a discussion, just like you would in your classroom, or to stop and check for understanding with really specific questions and have them respond in the chat. And that kind of keeps them engaged and also helps you to know how it's going. You can't see the confused face that sometimes comes up, or the glazed eyes. Probably you guys don't get that. I did. But you can't see that as well in an online setting. And so checking for understanding and stopping and asking them to chat to you in the chat is a good idea. It helps the class to go well, and it helps the lesson to get across well. You could do a test review. So if there's a test coming up, you can have that test and share your screen with the review and go over it. We'll talk about some tools that are available online as far as a whiteboard. If you have a doc cam, that would work as well. Guest speakers online is actually a great way to have guest speakers, because you don't even have to arrange whether that person can make it to your physical location. You can just share the link with the guest speaker and have the link there for the students, and you can all meet together in the classroom and the guest speaker can present. So remotely, you have a lot more range of people you could ask to come in as a guest speaker than you might in your face-to-face setting. Read alouds are possible. You can always either, if you're reading a book or something aloud, you might want to provide the text to them. If it's a picture book, you can absolutely put the image from each page into a Google Slides presentation and show that still as you're reading through. Homework review is kind of similar to a test review. You can always have a game or just have questions that you're reviewing and chatting back and forth. Guided practice sets. You can put practice sets either out ahead of time so they can work on them and then meet in the classroom to go over them or answer any questions they might have. You can do class projects still, so whether you use that time in a Google Meet with separate groups so they can work together on a project, or maybe you introduce the class project and then you meet periodically to just check on progress, the same way you would in a classroom. Just check in with the group, see how their progress is going, or be there present as they're working together so you can kind of monitor how it's going and answer any questions they have. Students can still give presentations and speeches just like we're doing right now. If you want to see them, you can ask them to use their webcam. If you just want them to present their material, they don't have to use a webcam. There are alternatives, like Robert talked about. It's good to have an alternative option where this is maybe a new thing. They might not have all the tools they need as far as technology goes, but most homes have a smartphone. And so if they need to turn in a speech in a different way than presenting live, they can always use the smartphone to record the speech. And I would suggest, since videos over email can only handle so much of a file size, to have them upload that to their Google Drive and then share it with you for grading. A virtual field trip is an option, and I know probably like me, many of you have seen all of these resources that are being made available and being brought to light as far as this current situation that's happening and providing resources to families and teachers. So here's just one of those that I saw. Here's just a list of 30 virtual field trips. So you can still visit state parks with your students and talk about what they see there. So you can either go through these field trips together, or you can have the students go through and have things that you want them to pick out, much like you might do in a regular classroom or on a field trip. So in Google Meet, you could absolutely share your screen and go to any of these places and walk through it. I would suggest testing these before you use them. So I would vet your source first, because I found a few in all of these that are coming out that maybe aren't as clean as far as visually, but there's some that are really awesome. The national parks and the zoos are really cool, as well as some of those science sites. So use the resources that are there, and where you have access to the internet and the ability to see things together. Really, there's not really a limit to what you can do in your classroom, whether it's synchronously, meaning you're going through it with the students at the same time, or asynchronously, meaning you provide it to them and they go through it. Short videos, you can share videos in Meet. My suggestion would be, rather than you sharing your screen and playing a video, would be to share the link in the chat and have each student watch it on their own and then come back to discuss it. Most of the time, live video sharing over a platform doesn't work out the best. I would say in meetings I've been in, 80% of the time, it doesn't go super well for everybody. So if you're using a video, I first suggest using a short one. Research has shown that about 6 minutes is the maximum length for a video before people bail. So that's a good length to have for a video, even if you cut it into pieces and stopped and talked about it. You could put the questions you want them to look for in the video up before you share the link so that they know what they're looking for, or you can share them afterwards and then just talk about what you've all watched. That can be a video you've created or one you've found from an educational source. I would say that make sure you watch all videos you share all the way to the end, just in case. You never know when some turn will make or some background image might pop up. So before using them, always watch them all the way to the end. Just from personal experience, sometimes things happen at minute 5.5. So you can do student interviews, either students inviting someone into the classroom and doing an interview there, or they can interview, you can interview students via Google Meet. Science experiments are still doable. I'm not a science teacher, but I know science teachers do use this. I would encourage you to look for experiments that can be done with household items. Maybe not toilet paper, because that seems to be in short supply right now, but any other household supply that's kind of common so that your students have access to it. And if they don't, you can use your camera in Google Meet, and you can demonstrate the experiment for them, and they can see all of the reactions that happen. In the resources we're going to share, there's also a lot of online labs that are worked through as well. Story building was described to me kind of as stone soup. Again, any of these that you use in your classroom, you're probably going, oh yeah, I totally know what that is, and I can use it again. I've never used story building as a math teacher, but it's just where you start a story and students contribute. So anything to keep them talking and keep them working through with you, a lot like when you're in your classroom, to keep them engaged. Ask and answer, where you ask questions and students answer, or maybe the other way around, like Jeopardy. Whiteboard practice, really important. I found in a math class is the ability to have a whiteboard, and we'll show you some of those that are available. Manipulatives and show and tell, one-on-one tutoring, which is probably how I use Google Meet the most. When student needs a one-on-one help and they need a little more visual rather than just a conversation over email or the phone, one-on-one tutoring works great. It's really fast to jump into a Google Meet with a student and help them right away, and they really like that, being able to get feedback. There are scavenger hunts you can do on the web. Ask an expert, I would say, is you can either have someone come in like a guest speaker and ask them questions, but you could also do a jigsaw learning method where you assign each student a topic to become an expert on before your next live session, and they present on that, and people can ask them questions. And yes, you can do games still. You have to be a little more creative, but if you've used things in your classroom already like Kahoot, you can still use that remotely. If they had access to a cell phone or tablet in your classroom to do Kahoot, I guarantee they have access to one at home to do that. And so those are a lot of the things that you can use. They're all common teaching practices. And I would just stress that you can still be yourself as a teacher in a remote setting. Two things I can tell you you'll miss is seeing the kids' faces and reactions a little bit, but also you'll get really good feedback in the chat or in emails where they feel like it's a safe place to share. The other thing that you might miss is the colleague across the hallway, but absolutely you can still communicate with them as well. So we have some resources put together, unless there's questions on any of those. Are there any questions on any of those strategies, or any questions about how it might work? All right. So that brings us to web tools that we have available to us. So eDays has put together a set of resources that you can use and gives you ideas. Now, when I click on this link, it brings me to quite a list, and it has all kinds depending on what you're looking for. You have image creation, you have review activities and games. And this is just a short, there's other things out there, but this is a short list of things that have been vetted by IDLA teachers that have been used and seem to be successful. So the things that I probably use most are math resources, obviously, because I'm a math teacher. But the free online whiteboards, whiteboards are a great thing to have if you don't have a dock camera. You can make a makeshift dock camera with your cell phone. I'll say that. I've done it. It works. But having an online whiteboard is a great tool to have. The video recording sites are also helpful. Down here at the bottom, it has a link to Loom, which I think probably overall, the teachers at IDLA have decided that's the easiest screen recording tool to use. So it's pretty easy. It doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles, which a lot of times means it's easy to use and easy to jump into. It just allows you to record short videos for your students where you can record your screen, or you can record yourself on the camera, and it immediately gives you a link to share. The other one I would suggest is the OER text resources. So if we go to that, these are open source, which means they allow anyone to use the content. So if you're looking for, you couldn't send textbooks home with the students, but you're looking for not recreating a textbook yourself, these are great resources to look up a topic and be able to share it with your students. And just like you would say, read page whatever, and we'll talk about it. You now have a textbook that you can share with them. I would encourage you, depending on the age of your students, to explore these. Some of them I've found are better for high school students, and some of them are better for elementary age kids. So those are some of the things on this resource list, along with all of this Google support material down here. That will be really helpful to you. As far as whiteboards go, I was going to show you one of the whiteboard options. So this is one that Jody Hill, who was a science teacher, made kind of as an example of how you could use the online whiteboard. I can share this link with all of you in the chat, and you can participate on the whiteboard as well. I'll share mine instead so I don't mess hers up. But you can take this link and you can share it with your students. I'll put it in the chat here so you can play on the whiteboard if you want to. And if they click on that link, they now have access to the whiteboard, and they can use all of the tools on the side over here. So that can be really helpful because visual is important. I'll see someone's smiley face. That's awesome. Okay. You can type, you can add images, you can add sticky notes if you want to. You can move things around on the board. This is a free whiteboard, and so it does expire after 21 days, which isn't a big deal if you're just opening it up to use in a class session. You can also download the whiteboard and save it and send it out to students as well. So this is just one of those tools. I think on the list, there were maybe 4 different whiteboards that were available. Up here in the upper right-hand corner of my screen, I actually have a Google Chrome extension called Page Marker. And it doesn't save what you've written on the screen, but it allows you to turn any screen into a whiteboard. So even this document right here, when I turn on Page Marker, it allows me to write on the screen. Okay, but it does kind of makes your screen stay there, and to leave you have to close it and the writing will go away. But if you had a document open and you just wanted to highlight something, or even if you're doing a math problem, it's just like doing the problem and then later erasing the board. Okay, so that is a Chrome extension that's available that turns really your desktop into a whiteboard and you can write. Okay, so as someone who's worked remotely, those are some of the things that I would probably use the most. but every teacher is different and every subject area is different. So make sure if you're looking for something in any of these areas, like maybe cartoons and memes, at some point you might need might need to make it more fun. So having a way to create a meme to share with your students, or having them do that to create something with their, to share, is fun and different. Are there questions on any of those e-resources? It really is an awesome, awesome document they put together. Has a ton of tools. One thing I would say is don't overwhelm yourself. Don't try 500 tools just to see if they might work. If you have time and that's a passion of yours, that is an awesome thing, but don't let yourself get overwhelmed. So what I would say is try one tool at a time that fits into your teaching style, and then maybe one fun tool that you just want to try out. You may find in this experience some tools that you love and you can take back to your face-to-face classroom and use all of the time. The other thing I would say is ask questions. Don't struggle trying to learn something. Reach out and ask a colleague, or eDay is going to have kind of a support line set up so that if you have questions on these, you can ask. It's always better to ask before you spend too much time and may be frustrated. Most of the tools on this list are pretty easy to use, but I know easy to use depends on the person, and it depends on the subject area, and it depends on all kinds of things. The other thing with trying new tools is if your students haven't tried it with you, introducing too many at a time can make it hard. So maybe one new thing at a time that the students have to interact with is a good pacing, and then when they get that down, move on to another one if you want to. But that's just from my experience in working in online situations. Those are two that will make your life super less stressful and more enjoyable for sure. The next thing we have here is eDays eDay resources. So some of the things we're going to do, eDay is hosting multiple webinars. This is one of them, but covering a variety of subjects. We're going to provide support desks for districts and charters so that they can get support and help in implementing eDays, and to give additional resources as needed. Like I said, we are setting up, it's not up there yet, but we will have kind of a helpline you can go to get more help if you have questions about anything. As a longer term thing, districts and charters can enroll students in full-time eDay classes and receive their support there. And eDay is giving some schools free access to online content. So eDay is kind of opening up their content to use as similar to a textbook if you need it, but that does have to be requested by your school administrator and your district representative, and we'll talk about that. The first thing I wanted to show you was this website because it has some really great tools in it. If you go down to the bottom, I was exploring some of these last night, and some of these are really great. There's some states that have been doing eDays for like snow or extended outages or even just a day out of school. I really liked, me personally, the Indiana eDay resource was really cool. They had a lot of like how-tos and just tips for teachers who are working remotely. So make sure if you're using this site, make sure you see everything down here to the bottom. It has a lot of great tools and a lot of great resources. And with that, we will go to the content. I'm gonna share the content with you, just show you what it looks like. So if you were to use it, you kind of know what you're looking at. So we're going to share eDays content, but again, your school administrator does have to request that. And there's the link right here at the bottom of this presentation. It was also at the top of this eDay website as well. Here is an example of what that shared content would look like. This is from an anatomy and physiology class. Each of these links goes to a lesson. I will tell you the one that just, for example, says Unit 1 is just the introduction to that unit. And then U1, L1 is the first lesson in Unit 1, and so on down the line until you get down to the review. So just to show you what one of these lessons might look like. Sorry about that. Okay, so just to show you what it looks like, for example, it would open like this, and when you click on a link, it opens that lesson. So this is on cell transportation. It has information similar to a textbook. You might notice the information is pretty short on each page, and that's just because we found if they have to scroll a lot, they miss information. And so the pages are smaller, but there's lots of information as you hit the next button. Notice there is a video there. There's a link to a website as well. As we keep going, here's another video explanation. And there is a transcript for each of those for accessibility reasons, in case someone isn't able to hear or see the, well, hear the presentation, they can read through the transcript as well. And there's another video. But I will show you the review because these also have what are called interactivities in some of the lessons. An interactivity just means that it asks the student to do something and it interacts with them. So for example, this is a matching activity where they take their choices and match it up. If you are a science teacher, yes, I'm probably getting all of these wrong. If I'm getting them right, I need to start gambling because I just guessed on all of them. But this is an example of one type of interactivity. Some of them have like flashcards. Some of them have work out the problem type of thing. So that is kind of an example, if you access the eDays resources, what they look like and what you can do with them. Okay, so what is the eDays content? It's an access to a digital textbook that was created by eDays teachers. It contains lessons, content, embedded videos, and interactivities, as you saw an example of each of those there. And it's considered a supplemental resource. So I wouldn't use this as just give this to the students and they'll be fine, because it doesn't have assignments, quizzes, or tests. You still need to provide that content for your students. And as a teacher, I would think we all want to. We want to be able to assess the students and make those ourselves. The teacher will need to identify appropriate material. So you'll want to go through and pick which parts are appropriate for where you're at in your class right now and what you want your students to know, and share just those parts rather than sharing the whole thing with them. And you'll also need to provide additional scaffolding and support to meet the students' individual needs. So they're coming out of wherever you are in your classroom, and you would want to start there and not just jump in to some created location where you're making a big leap, okay? But to have access to this content, your administrator does need to contact eDays, and then they will release the information to them so that then you can then use it with your students. All right, any questions at all? I know I've talked a lot. So again, before I stop, I would again just encourage you that you're professional teachers, you're great at what you do, you love your students, and it's going to be a positive experience because you already have those relationships, and you're working through it together. If you need help, ask for help. There's no need to struggle with anything that's new. eDays is here to support you where we can. If you have my name and you know me, you can call me anytime and I'll help you out as many eDays teachers would. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and put that in the form And we'll even follow up with you if we didn't have a chance to answer it here. If you leave your email address, we can follow up and help you out there. So I guess I will give it back to Robert or Aaron to see if there were any other questions that came through that they might want to answer.
I didn't see any questions. Awesome information, Lisa. Thank you for that. I do know that Aaron and a few other IDLA stakeholders are in the meeting. So did anybody else have anything to add before we conclude? I didn't see any other questions in the chat or in the forum.
Hi, Robert. This is Erin. We didn't have any new questions. However, I posted that form link in the chat one more time. If you find that you have questions as you start planning, that form is still monitored and will be monitored. So if you have questions, drop us a line and we can help you out as you go.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate everybody's attendance. Thank you for your attention and participation.